Hello, can you hear me? I'm very happy to be here today, and I'm sorry that I have to speak in this language. I often joke that Norwegian sounds to me like an Icelandic dialect, but that reflects badly on me because then I should be able to speak it myself, which I unfortunately cannot yet, but bear with me. So I'm here from Carbon Recycling International in Iceland. We are a company that started in 2006 and have been developing this technology to make CCU fuels and CCU hydrocarbons since then. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about our story, what we have accomplished, and of course how this fits into the grander scheme of things. So you've seen a little bit of this before in other talks, how this works. In order to make the hydrocarbon that we are making, the C1 hydrocarbon methanol, we take, of course, hydrogen and we take CO2. So the point of this slide is really just to talk a little bit about, first of all, the energy and mass balance, which is always important, but also that we are very flexible with the system in the terms of how we obtain the hydrogen, how we obtain the carbon dioxide. So we do not develop the system ourselves for carbon dioxide purification or carbon dioxide capture. We work today with industry, of course, industry that has to emit CO2 into the atmosphere. So the process of emitting the CO2 is not elastic to our demand. We do not have any impact on how the industry operates. That's very important for the life cycle analysis, obviously. But we hope and we pray for air capture to become more relevant and more, of course, cost effective. And there are other methods as well, for example, capture of CO2 from the ocean and other things like that are under development that we see as being something that will support this type of development in the future. The important thing, of course, is to keep the costs down in the beginning when you're a small and young company. The same thing goes for electrolysis. We start with water electrolysis using alkaline technology. We then can move to the other technologies that are being developed that we have also been working on, for example, solid oxide electrolysis, etc. The important thing is, of course, always to have access to renewable electricity that is carbon-free. And then our technology is also flexible to the utilization of hydrogen from other sources of a byproduct or stranded hydrogen. And so you heard a little bit about LanzaTech here earlier. They use bacteria to gobble up CO. We can use our system, which is basically a thermochemical system, to take other hydrogen sources, and I will tell you a little bit about what we've done in that in a second. Now, the core technology we have developed is the conversion system. So, which consists of basically of a reactor and a distillation system to convert these two molecules into a liquid. Methanol is a liquid form of gas, basically. And in order to do that, we need 200 kilograms of the hydrogen, 1.4 tons of the CO2 ends up in the product per ton methanol. Then what can methanol be used for? It is today actually a growing type of fuel, an energy source. So of course the fuel market is open, both through methanol directly as well as through various other derivatives. And then there's the chemical sector, which is what we're really talking about here today in terms of the circular economy. So I'll focus more on that in my next slides. So what have we done so far? I'm showing you here 4 examples. The first one, I wish I had a bigger picture to show you. This is actually a fairly monumental development in terms of this technology because we became the first of its kind plant in the world to actually use CO2 in the wild to make a hydrocarbon in the wild. It had only been a theoretical and experimental project before then. So we built a plant that was commissioned in 2012 in Iceland using Icelandic grid electricity for electrolysis. Geothermal CO2 is a particular form of natural occurring CO2 emissions. And we can make 10 tons per day of the product in that plant, or 4,000 tons per year. And we need 15 tons per day of CO2. So it's also a fairly large carbon capture system, in fact. And then our next 2 projects are actually plants that are smaller. So why would we do that? Why would we take a step back? Well, first of all, of course, there is the economic side of it. It takes a long time to develop large-scale projects and finance them. But the other thing that we also wanted to prove is the flexibility of the system. So we developed the technology to utilize wind energy in the project that we did in Germany this year. And then we are now starting up the plant in Sweden where we'll be utilizing blast furnace gas from the steel oven. So in a thermochemical system, we are converting blast oven furnace gas and using the energy from there and the carbon molecule. But the next step for us is very important, of course, and that is to go to what we call commercial scale. So we're going to scale up 25 times from where we are in Iceland in a project in China, where we'll take CO2 from a petrochemical plant, and the energy source is coke oven gas. So in both cases, of course, we are not talking about renewable energy, but this improves very much on a type of process that is used in China today to supply their system with methanol, and they are the largest consumer of methanol in the world. And even an electric car that would drive on this methanol in China, a combustion engine car that would drive on this fuel in China would be better than an electric car driving on Chinese grid electricity, to give you an example. So this is really the important thing here. It's how you slowly start to eat this problem, this big elephant that we need to consume. And this is the important step here, is to be able to scale up the technology and prove that it works at commercial scale. So that plant is going to make over 300 tons of methanol per day. Now, I'm also very proud to say that we've been working here in Norway now for about 1.5 years on project development. And I'm glad to be able to announce to you today that we have a partner here in Norway, which you might be familiar with, which is called Statkraft, a little bit larger company than us, and with a little bit larger presence in Norway than us. And what we are doing is basically, we're doing joint development, so 50-50 sharing of the cost of developing a commercial scale project here in Norway. We expect that plant to be, in the beginning, about 150 tons per day, so 50,000 tons of methanol per day. That will require 75 megawatts of electrolysis, by the way. And that energy will, of course, come from the Norwegian grid. So this fuel that we make from this, or this chemical we make from this, will therefore be only from renewable energy and with carbon capture from industry. I cannot tell you where we will locate, because we're still working on that side of things. We've been looking at different sites in Norway. And I often joke about this, that it's like putting out an advert on Tinder, except that I want to get into a long-term relationship with a polluter. And so that is not as easy as it sounds. Obviously, people want to get rid of these emissions, but we are making a fairly large commitment ourselves, and they have to make a fairly large commitment on the other side. And that is basically where it stands now. Is not so much a technical challenge as it is basically a challenge of building new business models and new relationships and trust. So what we have basically done with these projects that we've done already is to prove that you can use different flue gas types for carbon capture quite cost effectively for this process, and you can do it in the wild. That you can do electrolysis at grid scale, megawatt scale, which is something that Europe used and Norway used to be able to do many years ago, but we're doing now more and more. And then the load following operation of the system, which is important to be able to utilize renewable energy. So what is it really that we are offering with this technology? You have to look at what we call the life cycle of the product from cradle to grave. In the fuel sector, that is quite obvious. We're basically taking the well-to-tank and tank-to-wheel emissions of making normal fuels and comparing that to the footprint of our process. And that means that we can reduce CO2 by much more than the CO2 that we embed in the product, about 1.8 tons actually per ton of methanol of CO2 that is avoided. In the chemical sector, that is the upstream emissions from the alternative source of the chemical compared to the combined embedded CO2 and the minus the footprint of the energy that we are using. So it comes out to being basically somewhere around 2 tons of CO2 per ton of methanol. So this then we can take into the chemical sector. So the traditional ways that methanol is used in the chemical sector today are the lower part of the slide. So for example, here I'm showing formaldehyde, so that is glue that comes from that is used in particle board and insulation and laminates. You can even actually decaffeinate coffee with methanol as a solvent. That is another form that is used today. But the methanol to olefins process, of course, is where it's really at. That is the big volumes. And I want to show you here just 2 examples from this branch. So first of all, here we can embed approximately 1 ton of CO2 in 1 ton of glue through this process of basically making the glue from renewable methanol plus the other components here, which are primarily ammonia, urea, and formaldehyde. And then this is also an interesting example. Here the value driver is that when you do water purification, bacteria have to gobble up carbon so they don't make nitrous oxides. The bacteria end up as sludge that is used in biogas production. And here we can actually recycle the CO2 from the biogas directly back into the water reclamation process. And finally, take-home points. As I said earlier, it's actually not so much about technology anymore for CO2 capture. It's about the incentive to do something about it. The second thing is the framework for Power to X, which the legal framework is not that clear for companies that want to establish in the sector. And the third thing is, of course, how does a consumer that is complaining that he wants to have greener product, how can he actually interact with the companies like us that are making the green chemicals? How can we capture the value through this very complex value chains, like you saw the value chain for glue earlier? If I had some more time to talk about that, you can just imagine how difficult it is to establish a business that is based on replacing the common form with the new form. Thank you for your attention.